Have you ever imagined witnessing a vision so grand that it would forever change your understanding of God? Ezekiel saw something like it. In the midst of exile, when all seemed lost, he beheld celestial beings unlike anything human has ever described. Living wheels, covered with eyes, moving in perfect harmony with the glory of God. A scene so mysterious that it still inspires fascination and awe today. These are the Ophanim, beings mentioned in the Bible and ancient texts, surrounded by fire, brilliance, and power. Today, we'll delve deeper into this prophetic vision to understand its true meaning, exploring every detail based on scripture and the most ancient traditions. You'll discover why these angels are considered the most mysterious, their role alongside the divine throne, and what this revelation can teach you about your life today. Get ready, because this isn't just a story to listen to, it's an invitation to see the spiritual world with new eyes. And in the end, you'll understand how this vision can transform the way you experience God's presence in your daily life. Before we begin, write the word here in the comments, glory. If you'd like to see more content like this, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and activate the bell so you don't miss future revelations. Your support is crucial and helps us continue this journey of light and purpose. Thank you. In the 6th year of the Babylonian exile, when hope seemed distant and the people of Judah lived under the oppression of a foreign empire, Ezekiel, son of Buzi, priest and prophet, stood by the river Chebar. It was a scene marked by dust, intense heat, and the distant sound of activity in the city of Nippur, where many exiles were forced to serve. There, suddenly, the heavens were opened, Ezekiel 1:1, and he saw visions of God. It was no fleeting reverie, but a rupture between the physical and spiritual worlds. The historical moment itself reinforces the weight of the scene. God chooses to reveal something great to a broken people, precisely at the height of their national humiliation. In the vision, Ezekiel describes majestic-looking living creatures, each with 4 faces and 4 wings, Ezekiel 1:5-10. Alongside these beings, he notices something even more mysterious: immense wheels, brilliant like beryl, and full of eyes all around, Ezekiel 1:18. These wheels did not move randomly, but perfectly followed the cherubim, moving in any direction without turning. Their glow was not static, it seemed to pulse as if alive. Here arises the first micro-hook. Why would the Creator include living wheels, covered with eyes, in a prophet's vision? What is the meaning of this unusual shape? The narrative gains even more momentum when we reach chapter 10, where Ezekiel sees the same wheels again. He declares that the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels, Ezekiel 10:17. This is no mere detail. It means they were not objects, but spiritual entities integrated into the movement and purpose of the cherubim. This fusion of creature and celestial mechanism breaks with any human concept of transportation or symbolism. Here, a second micro-hook insinuates itself. Could these wheels represent divine omnipresence and omniscience, moving in perfect harmony with God's will? The biblical text doesn't soften the strangeness of the scene. Ezekiel sees the entire complex enveloped in fire, lightning, and intense light. The sound was like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, Ezekiel 1:24. Every detail seems designed to impress not only the eyes, but all the senses: sight, hearing, and even spiritual perception. To a modern audience, this description might evoke fantastical images, but the account is presented as real, historical, and direct. Here comes an anchor of confidence. The repetition of details in chapters 1 and 10 confirms that the prophet not only imagined something, but also experienced the same vision more than once. As we close this passage, it's impossible not to feel the weight of mystery. Who, after all, were these Ophanim, the Hebrew term for wheels, that appeared as an inseparable part of God's glory? Why do they appear at a time of national crisis and not in times of peace and prosperity? Ezekiel's account doesn't answer directly, but it leaves open a door to the next part of the narrative, the full setting of this prophetic vision and the supernatural atmosphere that surrounded it. Perhaps therein lies the key to understanding the meaning of these wheels covered with eyes. Ezekiel's narrative begins not with wheels, but with an environment charged with glory and power, capable of forever marking any eyewitness. He describes how, "I looked, and behold, a stormy wind was coming from the north, a great cloud with fire rolling around it, and splendor all around." Ezekiel 1:4. This combination, wind, cloud, and fire, is recurrent in other manifestations of God's presence, such as at Sinai, Exodus 19:16-18. Here, however, there is an additional element. In the midst of the flame, there was something like glowing metal, signaling the intensity and purity of the vision. The prophet also mentions a firmament bright as awesome crystal stretched out over the heads of the living creatures, Ezekiel 1:22. This expression, awesome crystal, combines beauty and awe, suggesting something so pure it inspires awe. Above this firmament, Ezekiel sees a throne like a sapphire stone, Ezekiel 1:26, and above it, a figure like a man, surrounded by a radiance like a rainbow on a rainy day. Every detail carries symbolic and sensory weight, projecting a scene that is not merely visual, but also touches the soul. The setting, therefore, is not just any space, it is the space of the heavenly court. The elevated throne indicates supreme authority. The firmament, the separation between the Creator and the created world, and the firestorm, the irresistible power of the Lord. All of this forms the framework for the appearance of the Ophanim. This visual and spiritual preparation is essential. Without understanding the magnitude of this environment, it would be impossible to grasp the importance of the wheels covered with eyes. And here a natural micro-hook arises. Why would God manifest himself in such a grandiose way to a people in exile? Another important aspect is that the text describes not only images, but also sounds. Ezekiel speaks of a roar, like the sound of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, Ezekiel 1:24. This possibly deafening sound reinforces the perception that what he saw was not symbolic, but real and active. In Hebrew tradition, God's voice is often compared to thunder and rushing waters, Psalm 29:3-4, and here it accompanies the scene as a mark of divine authenticity. All of this points to a profound truth. Before Ezekiel could grasp the meaning of the beings and the wheels, he needed to experience the atmosphere of divine glory. This sequence, first the setting, then the specific elements, is no accident. It is as if God himself were preparing the prophet's mind and heart to receive something that might otherwise be unbearable. But the question remains, what is the nature and function of these mysterious Ophanim moving in this environment of pure majesty? This is what begins to reveal itself in the next passage. The term Ophanim comes from Hebrew open, meaning wheel or cycle. It appears in Ezekiel 1:10 to designate the mysterious wheels that accompanied the cherubim in the prophet's vision. The word is also mentioned in apocryphal texts and in Jewish tradition, such as the Book of Enoch, where the Ophanim appear as part of the heavenly hosts near the throne of God. It is important to note that in the angelic hierarchy described in later Jewish writings, they are distinct from the cherubim and seraphim, occupying a unique role of their own. In the Bible, cherubim are often associated with guarding divine holiness, as in Eden, Genesis 3:24, and the Ark of the Covenant, Exodus 25:18-22. The seraphim, seen by Isaiah, are described as fiery beings who proclaim God's holiness, Isaiah 6:2-3. The Ophanim, on the other hand, are not seen guarding a specific location or verbally proclaiming praise, but rather integrated into a continuous movement around divine glory. This makes them unique. They are at once part of the procession and an extension of God's power in motion. In apocryphal texts, such as the aforementioned Book of Enoch, chapter 61, they are portrayed as beings close to the great glory and related to the celestial chariot. This is no ordinary chariot, but a symbolic representation of God's presence and rule over all creation. It is notable that in several of these sources, the Ophanim are closely linked to the Shekinah, the visible manifestation of divine glory. This reinforces the idea that they are not merely instruments, but active bearers of that glory. At the same time, we must note that the Bible does not offer an explicit explanation of their function or nature. Ezekiel describes what he sees, but does not interpret it. This lack of a direct definition leaves room for theological interpretations that throughout history have sought to understand the symbolism of the wheels. Some scholars associate the Ophanim with God's omnipresence and vigilance, while others see them as a symbol of the order and perfection of divine decrees. Here, an anchor of trust. Any legitimate interpretation must be based on what the text actually says, avoiding fanciful extrapolations. This mystery, that they are simultaneously concrete and symbolic, is what maintains the fascination of the Ophanim to this day. Those who see them only as wheels miss the fact that they are presented as living spiritual beings. But those who understand them only as angels may overlook the profound symbolic meaning of their form and function. It is in this tension between physical form and spiritual meaning that lies the key to understanding their structure. The next element Ezekiel describes in such rich detail. Ezekiel describes each wheel as being composed of a wheel within a wheel. Ezekiel 1:16. This image defies any human mechanical concept. It wasn't about axles, gears, or familiar structures, but about perfect multidirectional movement. The wheels moved to any of the four directions without turning, something impossible to reproduce with the human technology of the time, and even today, strange to our eyes. This characteristic conveys the idea of total freedom of movement, without physical limitations or the need for adjustments. The visible material of the wheels was described as brilliant like beryl, a precious stone of greenish or golden color, depending on the light. This detail is not merely aesthetic. In the biblical context, precious stones often represent value, purity, and authority. Thus, the appearance of the wheels reinforces that this is not a common functional element, but something consecrated and majestic. Here, a micro-hook is formed. If even their physical structure is so unique, what can we say about their function? Another aspect Ezekiel records is that the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Ezekiel 1:20-21, 10:17. This indicates that the wheels did not act on their own, but in complete harmony with the cherubim. There was no delay, hesitation, or conflict between the movement of the creatures and that of the wheels. They moved as a single organism. This absolute synchrony conveys perfection and unity of purpose. The wheel within a wheel arrangement may also have symbolic meaning: cycles within cycles, time within time, eternity without beginning or end. While this interpretation goes beyond literal description, it is based on the fact that the Bible frequently uses circular imagery to represent eternity and perfection. Psalm 92, Isaiah 57:15. This gives the Ophanim a timeless character, reinforcing their connection to God's eternal government. Here comes an anchor of confidence. The very repetition of the structure in chapters 1 and 10 confirms that this detail is not accidental. Finally, it's impossible to ignore that this visual architecture is presented even before Ezekiel describes the wheel's function. God first allows the prophet to absorb their form, and then shows how they move and function. It's as if each detail is part of a gradual revelation, where full understanding will only come when all the elements, appearance, structure, and function are united. And the function, in the case of the Ophanim, becomes even more intriguing when we observe the detail that most draws our attention. They're being covered with eyes everywhere. Among all the details of Ezekiel's vision, perhaps none is as disturbing and intriguing as this. His whole body, his back, his hands, his wings, the wheels were full of eyes all around. Ezekiel 10:12. This repetition of the word all emphasizes that there was no space without eyes. It was complete coverage. The eyes do not blink, do not rest, are not distracted. They are always watching. This image, at once fascinating and unsettling, goes beyond the realm of the purely visual and enters the symbolic. In biblical symbolism, eyes are directly linked to knowledge, vigilance, and divine omniscience. Zechariah 4:10 speaks of the eyes of the Lord, which run to and fro throughout the whole earth, showing that nothing escapes his perception. Thus the Ophanim not only move in perfect harmony with the cherubim, but also carry within their very structure a reflection of the all-seeing divine gaze. This acts as an anchor of trust. There is no room for doubt about God's presence and control over all creation. The presence of these eyes also reinforces the living character of the wheels. They are not ornaments, but active, sensitive elements, capable of perceiving and responding. In theological terms, this can be understood as a manifestation of the fullness of God's Spirit, who knows all things and searches the depths of the human heart, 1 Corinthians 2:10. And here emerges a powerful micro-hook. If eyes represent absolute knowledge, then what is the mission of a being with so many eyes? It's worth remembering that this isn't the only biblical reference to beings full of eyes. In Revelation 4:6-8, John describes 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. This establishes a parallel between Ezekiel's vision and John's, centuries apart, but united in the same celestial pattern. This biblical connection enhances the reliability of the narrative. We are not dealing with an isolated account, but a recurring element in prophetic revelations. The impact of this characteristic is twofold. For the faithful, it conveys security, as it symbolizes that God sees and knows all. For the rebellious, it represents a warning, as nothing is hidden from him. It is a constant reminder that God's throne does not move blindly, but with full awareness and purpose. And this total awareness manifests itself not only in perception, but also in action, something that becomes evident in the intimate connection the wheels have with the cherubim, a topic we will explore next. Ezekiel is explicit in saying that when the cherubim moved, the wheels moved beside them, and when the cherubim were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up. Ezekiel 10:16. This description reveals a perfect unity between the two. Cherubim and wheels did not act independently, but as if they were parts of a single composite being, not Hadaleh or synchronization error. Where one went, the other followed, moved by the same Spirit. The text further states that the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Ezekiel 10:17. This signifies not just physical proximity, but a spiritual fusion. The wheels were not externally controlled tools, but carried within them the same breath of life that animated the cherubim. This relationship indicates that the movement was not mechanical, but intentional, commanded by divine will and reflected in perfect harmony. Herein lies an anchor of trust. In the kingdom of God, there are no actions disconnected from his purpose. The cherubim, in turn, were already known in Hebrew tradition as guardians of holiness. Since Genesis 3:24, they appear guarding the entrance to Eden, and in the tabernacle they were depicted above the mercy seat of the ark, Exodus 25:18-22. By directly associating the Ophanim with them, Ezekiel's vision shows that the wheels participate in this mission of guarding and manifesting God's glory. They are there not only to move the throne, but to share in the role of guardians of the sacred. This connection also reinforces that the wheels cannot be interpreted in isolation. They are part of a larger celestial mechanism, where each element fulfills its role without rivalry or independence. Thus, God's glory is sustained, protected, and conducted with absolute order. This model of perfect cooperation in the spiritual world serves as a reflection of the ideal God desires for His people, unity in purpose and action. However, the function of these wheels alongside the cherubim is not merely static support. There is a dimension of power and active manifestation that involves fire, brilliance, and divine judgment. It is this aspect, visually striking and spiritually profound, that emerges in the next point, when Ezekiel describes the fire, brilliance, and strength that accompany the Ophanim. Ezekiel reports that what he saw looked like burning coals, like torches. The fire went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright, and lightning flashed out of the fire. Ezekiel 1:13. This is a description charged with movement and intensity, in which fire is not just a visual element, but a living presence. In the biblical context, fire is often a symbol of God's presence, as in the burning bush that spoke to Moses, Exodus 3:2, and also of His judgment, purifying and consuming according to His will. In addition to fire, Ezekiel mentions a glow that resembled burnished bronze, Ezekiel 1:7. Bronze, in Hebrew culture, was associated with strength, endurance, and judgment, Numbers 21:9, Revelation 1:15. This combination of fire and shining metal creates an image of majesty and unshakable authority. Nothing there seemed fragile or unstable. Everything conveyed absolute power. The lightning that came out of the fire add another symbolic layer. In several biblical passages, lightning accompanies divine manifestations, Psalm 77:18, Revelation 4:5, representing the swiftness and inevitability of God's actions. In the case of the Ophanim, this suggests that their movement and action are immediate, responding without delay to divine command. Herein lies an anchor of confidence. God's throne is neither slow nor hesitant. He acts in perfect timing. This array of elements, fire, brightness, and lightning, is not just for show. It serves a spiritual purpose, to reveal God's holiness and power in ways no human being could remain indifferent. Fire illuminates and warms, but also consumes. Brightness attracts the eye, but can blind. Lightning announces something imminent, impossible to ignore. This tension between beauty and fear is typical of the Ophanim biblical. By recording these details, Ezekiel prepares the reader to understand that the Ophanim are not just part of the vision, but play an active role in the manifestation of divine government. And it is precisely on this function, their mission, and their position in the heavenly hierarchy that the prophet leads us to reflect in the next passage. Ezekiel's text doesn't offer a primer on the exact role of the Ophanim, but the clues it provides, along with references from other biblical and apocryphal texts, allow us to identify important aspects of their mission. In Ezekiel 1 and 10, we see that they are part of the movable structure of God's throne, a throne that is not fixed in place, but can move in any direction according to God's will. This suggests that their function is linked to God's omnipresence and active rule over all creation. In the book of Enoch, especially in chapter 61, the Ophanim appear close to the great glory, forming part of the heavenly court alongside the cherubim and seraphim. There, they are described as guardians and upholders of divine glory, positioned alongside the heavenly chariot, Merkava. This Jewish tradition reinforces what is already visible in Ezekiel's vision. The Ophanim are not mere spiritual adornments, but a fundamental part of the manifestation of God's power and holiness. Another implicit function is that of messengers of judgment. The presence of fire, lightning, and sudden movement suggests that when God decides to act in judgment, they are among the agents of this manifestation. Just as the cherubim guard and the seraphim proclaim, the Ophanim seem to execute movements that mark the advancement of divine will in the spiritual and physical worlds. Herein lies an anchor of trust. Their every action is coordinated and guided by the Spirit of God, without flaw or deviation. Theologically, this mission can also be seen as a permanent testimony of God's glory before the other heavenly creatures. His presence beside the throne and his form full of eyes symbolize that nothing escapes the Lord and that his rule is both watchful and perfect. In this sense, the Ophanim are like living signs to all kingdoms, visible and invisible, that the king is in absolute command. However, the way they are interpreted has varied throughout history, and these interpretations say a lot about how God's people understand the spiritual world. This historical journey from the ancient rabbis to modern theories is what we will explore in the next section, revealing how Ezekiel's vision has endured through the centuries. Since the days of Ezekiel, the vision of the Ophanim has sparked diverse interpretations. Among the ancient rabbis, the reading was primarily spiritual. The wheels were seen as part of the Merkava, the celestial chariot that manifests God's glory and rule over the universe. This mystical tradition, known as chariot mysticism, became one of the bases for Jewish apocalyptic literature, where the Ophanim occupy a prominent position alongside cherubim and seraphim. Over the centuries, Christian theologians have also sought to understand its meaning. For many, the wheel within a wheel shape and the eyes everywhere symbolize God's omnipresence and omniscience. Thus, the Ophanim serve as a reminder that the Lord sees all things and that his rule is not limited by space or time. This interpretation, while symbolic, remains faithful to the central elements described by Ezekiel. In the Middle Ages, within scholastic theology, authors such as Thomas Aquinas mentioned the Ophanim when discussing the angelic hierarchy. Although there is no consensus on their exact classification, they are frequently linked to the level of the virtues or thrones, celestial orders associated with the execution of divine will and the maintenance of cosmic order. This interpretation, although influenced by Aristotelian philosophy, maintained the view that their role is active and functional in God's government. In modern times, more controversial interpretations have also emerged. Some scholars and curious observers, influenced by UFO theories, have attempted to explain the Ophanim as possible ancient descriptions of advanced technology. These approaches, while noteworthy, do not hold up to textual fidelity and the traditional interpretation of Scripture. Here comes an anchor of trust. The value of Ezekiel's vision lies in its spiritual and prophetic character, not in technical or anachronistic assumptions. Regardless of the era, one thing remains. The Ophanim remain a symbol of God's mystery and majesty. The way they are understood may vary, but the impact of their image, living wheels, full of eyes, moving with the Spirit, transcends cultures and generations. And it is precisely this mystery that leads to the final point of our narrative. Ezekiel's conclusion about what he witnessed and the invitation this vision extends to all who read it. Ezekiel concludes his description by making it clear that what he witnessed surpasses human comprehension. After describing the throne, the cherubim, and the Ophanim, he states, "This was the sight of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Seeing that, I fell face down to the ground." Ezekiel 1:28. The prophet's reaction, prostrating himself, is not just a sign of reverence, but of recognition that he was before something sacred and ineffable. The mystery is not revealed in its entirety, and perhaps that is precisely what gives the vision its enduring power. Throughout the narrative, we perceive that every detail, from the stormy wind to the wheels covered with eyes, points to God's majesty and sovereignty. There is nothing arbitrary. Each element carries a profound meaning, even when not fully explained. It is as if God himself were saying that there are aspects of his glory that cannot be understood, only contemplated. Here, an anchor of confidence. The God who reveals himself is also the God who keeps mysteries. This vision also serves as a timeless reminder to God's people. Even in the midst of exile, when all seems lost, the Lord's throne remains firm, and his rule is not limited by geography or politics. The Ophanim, in their constant movement, communicate that God's glory is not confined to a physical temple, but accompanies his people wherever they are. This is a message that resonates both in the past and in the present. The impact of this experience wasn't limited to Ezekiel. His description has spanned centuries, inspiring rabbis, theologians, artists, and believers. Even today, the vision of the Ophanim invites us to reflect. If God's throne is so majestic, if his heavenly servants act with such perfection and purpose, how should we live before such a holy king? This question resonates, provoking a personal and spiritual response in each listener, so the mystery remains. And perhaps that is the divine intention, not to explain completely, but to awaken reverence, faith, and expectation. Ezekiel doesn't give us a manual on the Ophanim. He gives us a glimpse of God's glory. And that glimpse is enough to change the way we view the world and the Lord who rules over it. Throughout this journey, we've seen how Ezekiel described the Ophanim, living wheels, full of eyes, moving in perfect harmony with the cherubim, surrounded by fire and radiance. Symbols of vigilance, perfection, and power, they remind us that the throne of God is always active, watchful, and present, even in the moments when we cannot comprehend his ways. But what about you? As you contemplate this vision, can you feel the weight of divine majesty? Do you realize that the one who rules over all things knows every detail of your life? The eyes that cover the Ophanim remind us that nothing is hidden and that every step we take is observed with love, justice, and holiness. Imagine for a moment the throne of the Most High in motion. The wheels spin without ceasing, the fire blazes, and all of heaven bows in worship. This same God is the one who reaches out to you today, calling you to live in a way that honors his glory. The question is, how will you respond to that call? If this message spoke to your heart, leave a comment sharing which verse or part of this vision impacted you the most. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to receive new content and discover the mysteries and majesty of God. And may the Almighty Lord, before whom even the angels bow, always be with you.